Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 11 Utilization Report edition. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down all of the Week 10 uses that you need to know to get those fantasy lineups right ahead of the waiver wire and, of course, Week 11 action. 4 more weeks until the fantasy playoffs, everyone. No time to let up now. And accordingly, we got the man who puts together the world-famous, internationally renowned utilization report in the first place, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. What's up, Dwain?
It's international. I can't believe it's finally gone international, Ian. But yeah, thank you. Hey man, I'm having a great day. Been working on the rest of season projections, about to work on the weekly projections. You know, we're just always grinding, having fun, watching some football. And yeah, utilization report this week, guys. If you haven't checked it out yet, go check it out at fantasylife.com. I think this might be the longest one, but it has the most players covered with different ranges of outcomes and stuff. Just because I know what Ian just said. You're trying to go win your championships. Trade deadlines are here. You're having to make big decisions. So it is an absolutely loaded edition of the utilization report.
Shout out to our lovely editors, Joe and Jorge, for doing the Lord's work with all of our, again, rambling on in those words. So check that out over at fantasylife.com. Also got my early Week 11 rankings article up as well, and loads of other goodness that, again, is always free to you all to read. So with that said, guys, let's get into things here on the Fantasy Life Show. It is time for our DraftKings opening lines. Before we get into some news nuggets, I want to go over some Monday Night Football utilization tidbits. Of course, we didn't exactly have the most fireworks going on during the Eagles' 10-7 win over the Packers, but there was some wide receiver usage we wanted to get to, in particular on the Green Bay side of things. First of all, though, credit to Devonta Smith, 69 yards and a touchdown on a team-high 7 targets. Saquon Barkley racked up 101 total yards and 25 touches. Josh Jacobs, 107 total yards and a score on his 26 touches. So usual suspects doing their things, but again, Dwain, it was more so this usage going on in Green Bay that is worth talking about. Obviously had Matthew Golden out with a shoulder injury. Also had Romeo Doubs suffer a chest injury in the second half, I believe it was. So now this already banged up Packers wide receiver room could be working at even less than 100%. So between Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, maybe even a Bo Melton or Malik Heath, who do you think could maybe take advantage, Dwain, if we do in fact see Doubs joining Golden, of course, Jaden Reed on the sideline?
Yeah, it's one of those rooms where there's so many moving parts right now. When I was working on the projection stuff, I was like, what do I do? Like, what do I do with this? And so I had to stop and really think about it for a minute. But just real quick, as far as what we saw last night, you already mentioned who was missing, what happened with Doubs. But Christian Watson, he posted his largest route participation of the season at 83%. He only had a 13% target share last night. He's a guy, Ian, we know can be around 18, 20%. And we know he's also the guy that works down the field, which obviously he did last night. He had a 32-yard average depth of target. So he's the big play guy. And then it was really Dontavian Wicks coming in and filling in the wide receiver 2 role. He had a 69% route participation rate. He was still coming back from an injury himself, but he had a 19% target share. And this is a guy that targets per out run, yards per out run, all those things have actually historically looked really good for this player. He's just never been in a full-time role. Has had some problems with some drops, dropped a ball last night as well. So we'll see what happens with that. But overall, those are going to be the top 2, beneficiaries. I mean, we did have Bo Melton flipping from corner, coming back and playing some receiver. He's really rotating with Savion Williams and some other guys. So I think Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson are the clear big 2. The one other note would be Luke Musgrave, Ian. So his first game without Tucker Kraft fully, 81% route participation, and he had a 10% target share. So you need more targets than that, but he could also be in the mix. He's definitely out there enough right now.
We'll note that Christian Watson had his own drop. I'm not sure if it actually went to the books as a drop. It's this weird phenomenon where these people don't always judge balls that literally hit you in the helmet as a drop, but it was funny to see that downfield. And then Christian Watson actually go to Twitter after the game and respond to a tweet and basically saying, yes, I should have caught that. So appreciate the accountability, Christian Watson. Dwain, one thing that I know you and I have both been looking at a little more closely in recent weeks are these man zone splits, particularly against defenses that are at the extremes, because not many defenses run a lot of man. The New York Giants are one of those defenses. They get the Packers next week. And oh my gosh, man, Dontavian Wicks, 33% targets per out run versus man covers this year, just 12% versus zone. We're saying there's a chance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a small sample this year, but that's a multi-year trend for Dontavian Wicks. If you go back and look at that sheet I send you, there's a 2024 tab in it. And even back in 2023, this man on the small sample was actually getting targets versus man. So yeah, I am saying there's a chance. And not only do the Giants like to run a lot of man coverage, they're also not very good in coverage. So when you put those two things together, it's pretty easy for your quarterback to spot the matchup that they want as soon as the ball snapped.
Again, hopefully we can get a hold of this wide receiver room because the schedule does lighten up here, starting off with that Giants game from weeks 11 through 14. The Packers had the sixth best wide receiver schedule in terms of their opponent's PPR points per game allowed to position. Fantasy playoffs, eighth best schedule. So I actually did go ahead and do that for every single position. You guys want to go check out my Twitter, you can go ahead and see that again for the next 4 weeks. And also, in addition, the fantasy playoffs if you're really trying to get ahead of the game. Otherwise, Dwayne, just some other news updates. We did have Adam Schefter confirm that Joe Burrow, who wants to come back around Thanksgiving, quote, more realistic to come back in week 14 from that turf toe injury. Also could matter exactly how competitive the Bengals are going to be over the next couple of weeks when we do see Mr. Burrow back in action. In the running back streets, Broncos RB J.K. Dobbins apparently a candidate for IR as he continues to figure out what to do with his foot injury. We'll be talking much more about R.J. Harvey and company here in a bit. Also note that Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco believed to be on track to play after the bye, but not so fast. My friend Andy Reid said, quote, he may take more time, so it could be another week with Kareem Hunt commanding that Chiefs backfield. Over in the wide receiver streets, unfortunate news, Jaguars wide receiver Travis Hunter believed to not have suffered a season-ending knee injury. In fact, did. He is undergoing LCL surgery and will miss the remainder of the season. That sucks, Dwayne. It really does.
Yeah, it does suck. And Parker Washington's the guy that's really stepping in here. We'll also see some more of Jacoby Myers. Last week was his first game with the Jaguars. Diami Brown also in the mix as well. But just have to give Washington a shout out, Ian. Over these last two games, he's got a 25% target share, essentially in a full-time role, averaging 14.5 fantasy points. He's got a 76 utilization score. So historically, guys, that have been in that range, like they've been really high end, not high end, but they've been more like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 performers. It's only 2 games. It's a little bit of a small sample. So I'm a little bit like more conservative. I did the rest of season projections earlier, and Parker Washington moved inside the top 40 wide receivers in the projection. So I would say, mid-range, wide receiver 3 to mid-range wide receiver 4, somewhere in there, depending on the matchup that you have for him. But he really did take over that role for Travis Hunter. He was playing more underneath, has the low ADOT, getting to operate from the slot. Do have to wait and see, though. You could get Brenton Strange back this week as Jacoby Myers starts to play more. That's the reason I didn't get like overly aggressive with the rest of season projection stuff. And that's why he came in more around 40. If we didn't have those guys at play, like he for sure would have been in the top 36.
Certainly dominating, particularly in punt return leagues, has 2 touchdowns this year, leads the NFL in punt return yardage. Dwayne, I was kind of chatting about return stuff on Twitter, and someone actually informed me and sent me a screenshot of a fantasy league with punters actually getting points for the amount of yards the ball travels. You get extra points for downing it inside the 20-yard line. Have you ever heard of a more effed up fantasy league than one with punters, Dwayne?
No, but I have heard of those before. Did you ask to join? Because I mean, I know that you can't stand kickers, but maybe you have an exception for punters. No, okay, that qualifies as a kicker. Gotcha.
Punters actually are necessary. Okay, I would want to keep them involved, but that's a story for another day. Otherwise, guys, 49ers will not be opening Brandon Ayuk's practice window ahead of Week 11. Remains to be seen if or even when he will be back in the picture. And also, no Packers center Elton Jenkins suffered a leg fracture on Monday night. Seems like IR is a likelihood. Also, Steelers signed free agent cornerback Asante Samuel Jr. to hopefully help out that much needed help cornerback room they have right now. And then finally, the Cowboys getting some reinforcements on defense. They have activated from the PUP list linebacker DeMarvion, Overshown. Really was impressive in limited action last year. No, not going to exactly replicate the dominance of Micah Parsons, but between him and now Quinnen Williams, could see this Cowboys defense go from literally the worst group in the league to maybe just bad, Dwayne, which honestly would be a nice little improvement there for the Cowboys. But enough of all that, guys. Let's get into the utilization report. This has been our DraftKings opening lines. Big games, big moments, and even bigger upside this week. I have teamed up with DraftKings Pick Six to give you a new way to get in on all the action. With Pick Six, you can ride the upside by making simple predictions. Will a player score more or less than the number listed? You stack your picks together, and the more you hit, the bigger your payout. And right now, guys, there's an incredible offer for new customers. Play $5 or more, and you'll get $50 in Pick Six credits. That's right, new DraftKings customers play $5 and get $50 in Pick Six credits instantly. Don't miss your shot to ride the upside. Download DraftKings Pick Six. Get on all the action and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. Thanks to DraftKings Pick Six for sponsoring this. Let's make this season one to remember. When you hear that catchy jingle, that means it's time for the utilization report presented by the fine folks at DraftKings. Again, always check out the full written content on fantasylife.com. But Dwain and myself will be covering all of the most important takeaways here today on the Fantasy Life Show. Starting off with Dwain, a clear-cut RB1 in Minnesota, not Jordan Mason. Instead, Mr. Aaron Jones has returned from the IR and honestly putting his best foot forward, averaging 6.9 yards per carry over these last 2 weeks. And the utilization is even better.
Yeah, man. We thought we might be getting this role 2 weeks ago, but we had the AC joint injury and we didn't know, like, okay, is he going to come back fully healthy from that? Is that going to cause them to, maybe to temper the workload, those sort of things. But that was not the case. He came back and got a 72% snap share. Aaron Jones did in this last game, dominated the backfield. He had 15.9 fantasy points against the Ravens and an 84 utilization score. So that's 2 data points, Ian, that pretty much point to Aaron Jones being the lead back. I know you asked on the Sunday night show, you wondered if it was to do something with game script. And I always think of those things you ask me when I'm writing the utilization report. And I went and double checked. First quarter, 96% of the snaps. So no, it was not just due to a game script. Like right out of the gate, it was Aaron Jones, Aaron Jones, Aaron Jones. And then they later decided, okay, fine, Jordan Mason, we'll give you a little bit. So yeah, this is really good news for Jones. And it's a 2-game sample, so I didn't want to get carried away with his utilization score. But last year, he had a 78 utilization score in his time with Kevin O'Connell. So if we look at his comps, Ian, 17% of them have gone on to be top 6 running backs. 29% of them were top 12 running backs. So you guys are kind of keeping, adding things up there in your head. I mean, you're almost at 40% of these guys being running back 1s. Most of them were mid-range running back 2s, though. Okay, so that's where I've got him slotted for right now. When I did the rest of season projections earlier today, Ian, it came in as the running back 21. And that's because, like, when I do those, I don't just automatically, like, flip everything over to Jones. I kind of take steps. Right. I went ahead and moved him up. I moved Mason down, but I didn't just give him exactly what he had last week. Also, the schedule over the next couple of, over the next 3 weeks is not great. I mean, you get the Bears this in week 11. That's fine. Then you get the Packers. That's one of the toughest run defenses in the league, a minus 6.5 fantasy boost per our DVP tool. And then you get the Seahawks minus 1.9. But man, Ian, heading into the fantasy playoffs, week 14, you get the Commanders. That's a plus 2.4. Then you get the Cowboys. Might be better, to your point, with some of the additions they've got, but 5.5. And then in week 16, you get the Giants, a plus 6.9 fantasy boost to running backs. A little bit tougher in week 17, but man, weeks 15 and 16, those are really good matchups for your fantasy playoffs. I did also look at some trades that went down. Juwan Jennings, Brian Thomas Jr., Rashid Shaheed, those are players being traded right now for Aaron Jones. If you need a running back, I don't think people really understand like how good he could be the rest of the way.
Sign me up for all that, Dwain. You're right. He really would have the best fantasy schedule in the playoffs if he just had, again, not the toughest, matchup there in week 17, but 30th ranked defense and 31st ranked defense in those first 2 rounds. Certainly will be good to have Jones on the roster then. So could be in a great spot this week too, man. Bears are actually ranked 31st in RB rush yards allowed before contact per carry. And it's a matchup that right now has a 48.5 point game total, potentially could be a shootout there in Minneapolis. So let's talk about Travion Henderson, someone who we try to tell you all throughout August, okay, yeah, it was going to be a rough 9 weeks, but once Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, Terrell Jennings all got hurt, that's when Henderson was going to be balling out. So, yeah, I know, guys. Again, I still firmly think it is an L here, but hey, that was then. This is now. We're focusing on the future. And as things stand right now, Dwain, Travion Henderson has a pretty nice stretch for himself, particularly if he can keep this utilization that we saw last Sunday.
Yeah, we're still taking the L, but I do want to just point out that, like, when he got on the field and he got his chance, let's be honest, Travion balled out. This is a coaching staff decision that they haven't wanted to give him the ball. And that's where we have to start. You guys check out the article. The first sentence I have under Travion Henderson is like, let's be crystal clear, guys. We have no freaking clue what Mike Vrabel and Mike McDaniels will do. Josh McDaniels. We don't have any clue what they're going to do whenever we do get Ramondre Stevenson back. However, having said that, we can still acknowledge the fact that, Travion Henderson looked pretty darn good. Ian had touchdown runs of 55 and 69 yards yards. To your point on the Sunday night show, even looked back to the coaches to make sure it was okay to score the touchdown and not go down. So maybe that got him some brownie points, but because we don't really know what the coaching staff will do, this is one of those where when I painted the range of outcomes, I had to do different scenarios, Ian. And let's let you vote on which scenario you would go with. Scenario one, Trevion Henderson's the new running back one. I knew that's the one that you would want. That's the one we want, believe me, to have any chance. We have some teams that have Trevion guys. We did draft them a lot like you. And I gotta be honest, some of you guys are just losers. You're telling me how your teams are like, 2-8. We have teams that are 4-5, 5-4, 5-5 now. And we're still these teams have a chance. We're just kidding. You're not losers. We gave some bad advice on Hendo, but in that first scenario there, Ian, that would just be saying, okay, great. We're going to go ahead and turn the backfield over to Trevion Henderson. So I used his utilization score from the last 2 games where he's basically had the backfield to himself. His comps have averaged 16.2 fantasy points. Look, 61% of them went on to be top 12 running backs. So you probably have a running back 1 and maybe even a high-end running back 1. But scenario 2, Ian, would be, okay, Trevion, you played really well, so we're going to give you more time. But, we still like that Ramondre Stevenson guy. And when he's back and his toe's better and he's available, we're going to split things. And also, just guys, on that scenario one of the doorways to Trevion, getting a larger role isn't even just, them giving him more playing time. It could just be this injury lingers on with Ramondre. Like, we don't really have a timeline yet. We don't know for sure what's happening here. And Terrell Jennings is also hurt. But in the second scenario, Ian, it gets a little tougher. Because we've talked about this with Kenneth Walker and with Zach Charbonnet. We've talked about it, with the Commanders' backfield. There's multiple, it works for the Lions, guys. It works for the Lions, but a lot of times, like even whenever we had the Panthers in those 2 games where whenever Chuba Hubbard first came back, and it was really hurting Rico Dowdle. So it can be a really tough scenario to weed through, but here's the silver lining. If it does go to more of like a 50-50, the schedule's really nice, Ian. Week 11, you get the Jets, who no longer have Quinnen Williams. Then you turn around, you get the freaking Cincinnati Bengals. It's the number 1 matchup for running backs, plus 9.9 fantasy boost per game to running back rooms. Then you get the Giants, a plus 6.9. You got to deal with a bye week. Now, these next 2 games, you come back, you get the Bills, you get the Ravens. Those could be wonky game strips, but the Patriots have been good, right? So they should be in those games. Those are positive matchups as well. And then you get the Jets again in week 17. This is one of the top 3 remaining schedules for running backs. So in a part-time role, normally we'd be a little more worried than that, but because that schedule is so good, like he would still have a chance to hit those big plays. The final scenario would be Grandpa Vrabel just goes back to Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, after all, this is a guy that has decided to keep Derrick Henry on the bench for like 2 years because he liked Dion Lewis. And not use Derrick Henry in a full-time role. So we don't know, but that's the range of outcomes are super wide here. You could have a running back 1. You can have a running back 5. And you guess what? No one knows, guys. Anyone that tells you that they know, they don't know unless they happen to personally know Mike Vrabel and he has told him what he's going to do with this. So, you know me, I usually lean in the middle ground of that probably like a borderline running back 2 with running back 1 upside. But where are you headed, Ian?
I do think in my brain that it's going to be more so scenario 2 once Ramondre Stevenson is back. It doesn't seem like it's going to be this week necessarily. They did list Ramondre as limited on their estimated practice report on Monday, but he was working off on the side in practice, not doing the usual full team stretches. Same thing with Terrell Jennings as well. So at least for this week, Dwain, it could be great, but I just have a feeling once Ramondre is going to be back, we're probably going to get something that was, I think, closer to what both of us thought Trevion was going to have from the jump, 12 to 15 combined carries and targets. I hope, okay? That would be my one concern here. Despite that huge game last week, we just still haven't seen him fully tapped into as a pass catcher. That's been the most surprising thing out of anything that's gone on in New England for me this year. Only 5 catches in his last 4 games. So where did he come out in your rest of the season ranks, Dwain? Because I think you said, around borderline RB2. I feel like that's probably about right.
Yeah, that's right where he came out. I look at the utilization stuff a lot as I'm working through the rest of season projections, but he's my running back 24. So basically that borderline running back 2. I've got him slightly ahead of Ramondre. I just think, like, we've seen Ramondre this season and now we've seen what Trevion has done. So sometimes with these projections, we're also trying to lean into, okay, like if people are going to look at this stuff and take something away from it, like we want people to really try to lean more into Trevion Henderson, right, than Ramondre. Because if either of these 2 guys is going to be a league winner for you and it somehow breaks their way, and it could be either one of them guys, like if Trevion went down, Ramondre is a good player, but Trevion's the guy right now. I will say this, like, depending on your league and your roster, like, that's why I give you guys the range of outcomes. In some leagues, Trevion Henderson could be a sell candidate. If somebody truly loves him and thinks that he's taken over and they're certain of it, and they think he's a running back one the rest of the way, and they're willing to trade you something really big for Trevion, like, I would take it. But if they don't, and they're like, he's a running back three, no way, man, I'm holding, because I could have a running back one on my hands. I just don't know right now.
And I will say Ramondre really was starting to ride the struggle bus before he did, again, start missing some time here. Was under 2.5 yards per carry in 3 of his last 4 games, again, before being out. Maybe that's because he was trying to play through the issue, but to your point, maybe he doesn't come back 100% healthy, and Trevion's able to, again, be that genie that stays out of the bottle. So we'll see what happens there. But again, at a minimum, feeling great about Thursday night. He is my RB14 and should be in fantasy lineups of pretty much all shapes and sizes. Dwain, another rookie RB who was getting a lot of hype in August, disappointed people for the majority of the first 2 months of the season, but God, America loves a comeback, and it seems like RJ Harvey might have a chance to do just that. Again, not completely sure what's going down with J.K. Dobbins right now, but the fact they're saying IR could be a possibility sure makes me think he's going to be out at least for this week and likely multiple more. So with RJ Harvey, Dwain, it is one of those things where both of us are old enough to know, trying to predict Sean Payton's player usage can at times be absolutely maddening, particularly in the backfield. But what I'm kind of leaning on, man, is just the fact that this season, okay, J.K. Dobbins, 150 carries. All right. RJ Harvey's at 50. Jaleel McLaughlin has 1. Tyler Beatty has 2. Okay. I'm expecting Beatty to still be annoying in targets and everything like that. But dude, J.K. Dobbins is averaging 15 carries per game this year. I think the heavy majority of those are going directly to RJ Harvey.
Yeah, and that's what I wrote in the utilization report. I think that's the primary role that RJ Harvey's going to step right into. Look, they spent a 2nd-round pick on him. He had a 3rd-round grade on him by a lot of people, but the Denver Broncos clearly wanted him. So now's a chance to really pay things off with that, Ian. And here's the big thing with RJ Harvey. Even though he's been frustrating so far, when he's gotten his opportunities, like, he's done well, and he's actually done well on limited opportunities. In week 4, he had a 41% snap share, gave you 19.8 fantasy points. In week 8, on 28% snaps, gave you 24.1 fantasy points. Week 9, 31% of the snaps, gave you 16.6 fantasy points. So another way of looking at this is, in the games where Harvey's rushing attempts and targets totaled at least 7, not a high number, Ian, just 7, he averaged 17.1 fantasy points. So now efficiency can go down as your workload goes up. Guys, we all acknowledge that. We're not saying that RJ Harvey's going to score 40 fantasy points per game. But man, without J.K. Dobbins, it's going to be very, very hard not to just rank him as a running back 1 right away. Like, I think he's a borderline running back 1. You've got the schedule here is tougher than what we talked about with Trevion Henderson, what we talked about with Aaron Jones. You get the Chiefs this week. That's a minus 3.2 fantasy boost to opposing running backs. You get a bye week. Commanders, nice matchup. Raiders, fine matchup. But then you get the Packers, minus 6.5 fantasy boost. And then you get the Jaguars and the Chiefs, who are, below average matchups against running backs. So not as good of a schedule. But the other thing, though, Ian, even though we think mostly he's going to take over the ground game, Harvey has been very, very utilized, like, in the passing game this year. So if we look at it, his targets per route run, 23%. He ranks 5th of all running backs with at least 100 routes this season. And then he ranks 11th in yards per route run at 1.42. So I do think that's a nice, like, little thing to have in your back pocket. We know that Sean Payton likes to design these looks. I think he will actually continue to get targets. Now, we didn't see J.K. Dobbins really get anything, but I think part of that was because Harvey was getting those targets. So I do think Harvey actually has a chance to step into a role that was larger than J.K. Dobbins. I think it will be carries and him getting some targets, but I do agree with you. Tyler Bidet is going to be out there, and Jaleel McLaughlin's probably going to piss some people off, Ian.
Hopefully Harvey, again, is going to be racking up all these touches. And if he does, he could get to those RB1 heights. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative to start, Dwain. There also is just a case of a lot of running backs having some good matchups this week. So I know your ranks will be live on fantasylife.com by Wednesday. Mine are up there right now. Chase Brown's my RB11, Derrick Henry's RB12, then Kyron Williams, Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. I think it's pretty hard to move Harvey ahead of those guys right away. Where would he fall for you, Dwain, in this next tier? Ahead of all of them, behind all of them? Breece Hall, Jalen Warren, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne, Kamani Vidal. Because that's kind of that group where I think you can make an argument that he should be in front of them all. And also, if you wanted to say, I put him behind, I kind of get that too.
I would put him ahead of all those. And the main reason why is I don't think Jaleel McLaughlin or Tyler Bidet are going to get 50% of the carries. I think is what you said. They're going to get on the field, get some pass down work, but I think we're probably getting 50 to 60% of the rushing attempts channeling through Harvey. I think he probably ends up with another 10% like in targets on top of that. And I just like the scheme for the running back. So I would put him ahead of all those. Kamani Vidal is the one really interesting one that you mentioned there, but he's been a little bit up and down. So yeah, I do lean to Harvey.
And again, I think it'd be easier if Warren didn't have the Bengals and if Aaron Jones didn't have the Bears and some of those other good matchups going on. But hey, either way, guys, I think you're going to be hard-pressed to have too many lineups for Harvey. Shouldn't be in there either way. So good stuff there, Dwayne. We do have some other utilization report, big takeaways to get to. First, I want to give one last word to our friends at DraftKings. Again, guys, if you play $5 or more, you'll get $50 in Pick Six credits. Don't miss your shot to ride the upside. Download DraftKings Pick Six. You can get on all the action and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. Jacoby Brissett has breathed new life in this Cardinals offense, when he's not getting strip sacked and then giving up long touchdowns on back-to-back drives. But otherwise, Dwayne, it has been nice to see, a regular sized human under center for the Cardinals and getting his top two pass game options involved. Obviously, Trey McBride going nuclear, but we've also seen a few spike weeks now out of Marvin Harrison Jr. What are your thoughts on the artist formerly known as Maserati Marv moving forward?
Yeah, Jacoby's getting sacked a lot, Ian, but he allows the Cardinals to run the offense that they want to run. And you mentioned two key words. You said under center. That's something that Kyler Murray doesn't do. It is something that Jacoby Brissett will do, and it's really the offense that Drew Petzing wants to run. If you look at the under center snaps with Brissett, 39%, 21% for Kyler Murray. Play action dropbacks, 33% for Brissett, 23% for Kyler Murray. Yards per attempt, 7.2 for Brissett versus 6.0 for Kyler Murray, and just better on play action as well. So this is really the version of the offense that the Cardinals want to be running. They're marrying the ground game and the pass game, and Brissett's doing a good job with it, man, averaging 280 yards per game with 2 touchdowns per game through the air. So, and here's the thing, I don't think he's going to lose the job back. I think when Kyler Murray comes off IR, given the fact that it sounds like they're headed for a separation, like one, you don't want Kyler Murray getting hurt, and number two, all those things I just said, I think they like Brissett to run the offense better, and it has been very good for Marvin Harrison Jr. Ian, sometimes there's things we talk about on the Sunday night show, and then I get more time to go research it, and I change my mind a little bit because on the show, I know we were talking about how hard everything looks for Marv, and it does, guys. When you watch the film, like it still looks hard for Marv. Had a good matchup against the Cowboys 2 weeks ago that's kind of helping boost things here. But man, in the 3 games, with Brissett averaging 14.9 fantasy points, the 3 healthy games, right? There's been 4 games with Jacoby, but only 3 of them, Marvin Harrison Jr. has been healthy. He's got an 80 utilization score over that period, Ian. And so here are the historical utilization score comps for Marvin Harrison Jr. They average 16 fantasy points per game, and 44% of them were wide receiver 7 to wide receiver 12. 9% of them were wide receiver 1 to 6. Guys, I'm not saying it's happening, but this is why we created the utilization score. And this is why I look at the range of outcomes, is because we don't see these things. But look, over 50% of these guys were wide receiver 1s. When I first put him into the rest of the season projection stuff and started making my updates, Ian, today, he came in as like wide receiver 14. And I just manually said, no, this is Marvin Harrison Jr. It's a 3-game sample. I'm not allowing this to happen. So I moved him down to like wide receiver 21 and just made a few adjustments. But still, like he's inside the top 24 now. And if you look at it, after those names that I gave you, the majority of those that weren't wide receiver 1s were wide receiver 2s. Only 7% of his comps were wide receiver 3s. So I think this is really good for Marv. I still don't think he's a complete player. I still don't think he's probably worth the number 4 pick. He's not as good as what we had hoped for. But he's functioning really well in this version of their offense, and Jacoby is dialing him up, man. He's averaging 9.3 targets per game with Brissett with a 27% target share. So looking really good right now for Marv. I do think that he is a borderline wide receiver 2, and he offers wide receiver 1 upside the rest of the way.
And I think that's the key point here. Marv is a usable, startable, low-end wide receiver 2, okay? We were forced to still treat him as a boomer bust wide receiver 3 that he was as a rookie and that he honestly was during the first month and a half of the season as well. I still do worry about the Cowboys game perhaps inflating things a bit much because, my God, man, like just – you're paying Deron Bland $90 million. You can't go up and press the guy like one snap all game. So again, I don't like taking away players' good plays, but I just feel like the Cowboys have been such a just weird exception to a lot of passing attacks this year. If you do look at these other 3 games with Jacoby Brissett, he caught 7 of 20 targets for 123 yards and a touchdown. So he's getting downfield. But again, it's just at 6.2 yards per target, guys. Even with Kyler, he was at 9.6. So I'm not completely buying that Jacoby has, for sure unlocked Marv, but at the same time, he's throwing them the ball enough to actually have the wide receiver one workload that when you draft a guy fourth overall, why are you not feeding him targets? They're feeding him targets, Dwain. And if they do that at a wide receiver one rate, even if Marv isn't quite functioning as the wide receiver one, to your point, he can still fall in wide receiver two land.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's inefficient, if he keeps getting that many targets, he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2 or a high-end wide receiver 3. If things suddenly click for him as a player, or he just gets on a hot streak and he starts doing more with those targets, that's where the wide receiver 1 ceiling comes in. So we care most about intent, guys, and the intent right now is there to get Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball. And he's playing well enough to earn the targets. To Ian's point, he needs to be more efficient. But if there's one thing that we know can be the most fluky thing in fantasy, it's efficiency. Right? Typically, the earning the targets and the things like that are the things that matter more. And the air yards are just massive for this guy. And down the field targets are one of the most fluky, unsticky week to week things. Unless you're Troy Franklin, then it's just every single week that it doesn't work out. But what we see is look, these deep targets, sometimes you connect, sometimes you don't, sometimes you get on hot streaks, sometimes you get on cold streaks. So the intent is there. But I think you nailed it, Ian. The big thing is you have a player that you can start. Let's just be happy with that, because let's be honest, it wasn't just a wide receiver 3. We were calling him a wide receiver 4 5 weeks ago. We're Marv's just a boom bust wide receiver 4. Now we're talking about a guy that's a borderline wide receiver 2.
He's my wide receiver 20. Freeman's wide receiver 21 on the same page there. We do have him ranked ahead of guys like DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton, Tedero McMillan, Stephon Diggs, behind Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Rome Odunze, the Eagles wide receivers, and George Pickens, amongst others. So again, not knocking on the wide receiver 1 door just yet, but certainly a nice step in the right direction. So let's talk about Bears running back DeAndre Swift. Got back onto the field last week and also got back to being the clear-cut RB1 in Chicago. That said, despite Swift actually working this season as the RB12 in PPR points per game, a certain someone, aka you, are wondering if maybe it's time to try to sell high on the man.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on here. Number one, yes, Swift did step back into the lead role. So if you are the DeAndre Swift manager, that's still good news for you. I'm a DeAndre Swift manager with you, Ian, on a few teams, on some of my teams that I just drafted. Okay. So it's still a positive, not telling you just to go give this guy away. But since the bye week, things have really tightened up. Whenever we look at the rushing attempts and the snaps, Swift is still in the lead role, but he's not in that role that we saw earlier in the season. And so that's one thing. The other thing that we have here, Ian, is we have a utilization score that's taking all of that into account. And if you look at his historical comparisons, it says that he's overperforming. If you look at him right now, he's averaging 19.1 fantasy points since the bye week in his 4 healthy games, but he has a 76 utilization score. His historical comps average 14.7. So that is clearly a player right now that's playing well above expectations. And remember, with the utilization score, we're giving them credit for their fantasy points, guys. So that's one of the nice things, because a lot of times, one of the things that drives me nuts about it, just pure expected fantasy points, it's really just all the best players that are at the top that are overperforming expected fantasy points. So the utilization report, with the utilization score, we try to kind of offset some of that. But if you look at this, Ian, only 30% of his comps went on to be running back 1 to running back 12s, which is really where he's sitting right now. And then you look at the schedule. So here's the third thing that's going on. You play the Vikings this week. That's minus 1.1 fantasy boost. You get the Steelers. That's a minus 3. The Eagles, a minus 1.7. And that was before Monday night. You get the Packers, a minus 6.5 fantasy boost. The Browns, minus 5.6. The Packers again in week 16, minus 6.5. So your fantasy playoffs, minus 6.5 fantasy boost, minus 5.6, and minus 6.5 before getting a nice matchup in week 17 against the 49ers. So it's just one of these things where almost all the matchups are of the negative variety. And we already have the utilization score telling us he's overperforming. I think when you add it all up, if you can get something nice for Swift, you should. If you can't, you just fine. You just keep playing him. He's still going to be a usable fantasy asset. I just don't think he's going to continue to hang around this 20 fantasy points per game mark.
Again, averaging 17 touches per game. He's on the 7th-ranked scoring offense. But we've talked about that scoring offense and how we've had some real highs against, the Bengals, the Cowboys, the Saints. They looked okay against the Giants. We still haven't seen them exactly put everything together in that same manner against. We'll find out what they can do here in a few short weeks. But you mentioned, man, 8th toughest schedule over the next 4 weeks in the fantasy playoffs. I don't hate what you're preaching right now. So I will say, when you go and look at the Yahoo trade markets, I guess they are real trades because these are being reported as real trades. but you will see some wild ones that I just can't in my heart of hearts imagine are actually getting done. So keep that in mind. But that said, Dwayne, straight up 1-for-1 trades today on Yahoo. Swift for Lab McConkey, Kyron Williams, Roma Dunze, Nico Collins. I am smashing that in every instance. Again, I question the validity of how often your friends are going to be saying that, but worst case, you get made fun of in the group me as always. So good stuff there. Now, guys, we get to some utilization score over and underperformers. First, so a quick word to our friends over at Xfinity. If you call yourself a sports fan, you got to have Xfinity, guys. All the games, all in one place. And here's what you get when you watch sports with Xfinity. You get the Sports Zone, which features every pro football game and over 1,000 college games, highlights, and alerts all in one place. You have the multi-view option, which allows you to be up in 4 stadiums at once. The Xfinity Fan View, which features live scores, odds, and stats all in one place, personalized to you. And oh yeah, it's all in Xfinity. Enhanced 4K, a simply stunning visual experience. And hey, with your voice remote, all you have to do to find all this is just say football. Imagine all your football all in one place. Easy. Xfinity. Learn more at Xfinity.com. No restrictions do apply. New residential customers only. Tax and fees are extra and subject to change. One of the best things about the utilization score, Dwayne, is you're capable of taking it in one column and then looking at their actual fantasy points in the other and determining who's over and underperforming. So with that in mind, we're getting to 4 of the bigger names for just that. Starting off with Chris Olave, someone who, man, over the last 5 weeks has worked as the wide receiver 12 in terms of PPR points per game, but he's second in the entire NFL in targets right now at 95, only behind Jamar Chase. You think there might actually even be more of a ceiling here, Dwayne?
Yeah, he's averaging 14.9 fantasy points per game. But if you look at his historical utilization score comps, he's got a score of an 81. They've averaged 16.4 fantasy points, Ian, with 65% of them having wide receiver 1 season. So Olave is a guy that we've talked about actually 2 times before on the show. He's made the utilization report multiple times this year. But we were a little worried because now we had Tyler Shuck taking over. We didn't know if we were getting a Dylan Gabriel type situation. And we still could, guys, to be fair. We've got 2 games with Shuck. But the thing that, Ian, I know that you've noticed, that I've noticed, and I like about Shuck, you like about him, pushing the ball vertically down the field, man. This guy has a 10.48, or he's got 10.4 yards per attempt or he had 10.4 yards per attempt last week, pushing the ball down the field with a 9.1 average depth of target. So actually getting more vertical than what we even saw before with Spencer Rattler. And then you have the fact that Rashid Shaheed is gone, Ian. So these targets are really secure at this point for Chris Olave, and he's getting most of the slot work. 54% of his routes have come from the slot, or came from the slot last week with Rashid Shaheed gone. So getting to work against mismatches, getting vertical down the field, the young quarterback looking good. Utilization score says you have an opportunity to be worth even more. The schedule is it's not great, Ian, but it's only got really one really outlier tough matchup. And that one hasn't even been as bad lately, but you get a bye week in week 11. And then that's the toughest matchup, guys. That bye week is the toughest matchup. But then you get the Falcons, and that's a minus 4.6 fantasy boost against wide receiver rooms. And then the rest of them are all negative besides week 14, but none of them are of the really gross variety. And week 16 is the Jets, who no longer have Sauce Gardner. Right. So, and if honestly, a lot of these teams that you see on here that look like they're good pass defenses, like the Dolphins, the Panthers, the Titans, no, those are teams that just get their wheels blown off and people get to run the ball. But the Saints are not a type of team that's going to blow your wheels off. So I think those could actually be closer games. So Olave, mid-range wide receiver 2 right now, but man, he really does carry wide receiver 1 upside as long as we don't get an implosion by Shuck.
And again, just really no target competition to speak of. There's not like this first or second round rookie wide receiver waiting in the wings that can make this big leap. With all due respect to 35-year-old Devon Vele in his second NFL season, I just don't exactly see him as emerging as a major threat down the way. So like that call on Chris Olave. Another person that you do believe to be underperforming, Ashton Genty, Dwayne, who honestly in my rankings column, I just looked at his 17-game pace, 1,290 total yards rushing and receiving, which sounded right. On pace for 13 touchdowns this year, though. That number actually did surprise me. So again, not killing it this year, but a fine enough mid-tier RB2. I think we can all agree from watching a couple of Raiders games, the offensive line has been the bigger problem here. You do believe, though, Dwayne, that better days could be ahead here for Mr. Genty.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where like the volume is what matters the most. And it just gives Genty a real opportunity to do some things that a lot of other running backs don't get the opportunities to do because they're not getting the touches. And so 90 and 88% snap shares in the last two games. I mean, over the last month, they had already handed this thing over to Genty, but over the last two games, Pete Carroll and the coaching staff has just essentially said, here, like all you can eat, man, all you can handle. And so the bull case for Genty would be looking at his utilization score of 92, which he's hit in 3 of the last 4 games. Ian, man, the historical comps for that have averaged 19.1 fantasy points. If you look at the 3 games where he's had the full complement of snaps over the last month, 17.3 fantasy points for Genty. So there's some upside there. 72% of his comps were top 6 running backs. 92% of his comps were running back ones. So matchups this week, obviously, is a really good one. You get the Cowboys. Then you get a tough one against the Browns, minus 5.6 fantasy boost. Chargers, a neutral matchup. Broncos is really a neutral matchup for running backs, guys. When people think of the Broncos, they think it's bad for everyone. It's bad for the receivers. Like for the running backs, it's a neutral matchup. Eagles, semi-tough matchup. Texans, a little tougher on the ground than what the Broncos are, but it's not terrible. But in week 17, you get the Giants. So the second best matchup for running backs. So 2 really good matchups, 2 tough matchups on the schedule. So you got a little bit of a mixed bag here. But you guys just, again, remember, the volume is the best indicator of having a chance to really blow up over the matchups. And I think the matchups, like it's a mixed bag. It's enough that like there's some nice things there. So yeah, Genty's a low end running back 1. That's where he came out in the rest of the season projections today. He came out as the running back 12. But I think he does have high end running back 1 upside. Obviously this week against the Cowboys could be a big boom, Ian.
Would just love to see them get a bit more design work as a receiver. I know Genty isn't without his faults there. He had the drop last week that led right to an interception. But, man, they had some early plays on that Colts game where he caught a downfield wheel. And just the things he can do when you actually get him in space, man, really have popped off the film. One more underperformer before we do, pour some cold water on an overperformer. I want to talk about Jaylen Warren, Dwain, someone who, again, has made the most out of his opportunities. We all saw the hurdle on Sunday night. But that's honestly been par for the course for most of the season. Only Omarion Hampton has actually averaged more avoided tackles per touch than Jaylen Warren, which has really been a staple in his profile, save for last season when he was dealing with early season hamstring and knee injuries. So he's healthy, looking good. We even have Mike Tomlin today say like, yeah, we'll get Jaylen Warren more touches if our offense converts a bit more on third down. Funny how that works sometimes. So Jaylen Warren, Dwain, really dominating the backfield's utilization. So hopefully even bigger and better days are ahead in the box score.
And that's a perfect answer from Tomlin. Like, what else do you want him to do? He's giving him 80% of the rush share over the last 4 weeks. I mean, like you can't really give a running back much more than that. You just got to convert your third downs, keep those drives going, and that 80% is going to turn into more carries. So with Warren, I have to call him a potential underperformer, Ian, because technically speaking, his 14.3 fantasy points is actually right in line with what his utilization score comparisons have averaged, which is 14. Okay. But I'm calling him a potential underperformer because his fantasy points are also part of the utilization score. And so sometimes if someone has been a bit like had some really tough weeks as far as their performances in the box score, it can like overly pull down their utilization score. So these are just the things that like you learn from working with it and like knowing like, okay, what are the strengths of the utilization score? What are the things where sometimes it can get a little bit wonky? And this is what I'm telling you guys. There's room for upside here with Jaylen Warren. And Ian, you mentioned the efficiency on the ground. The other thing is this is a player that has historically been very good as a receiver, and he only has an 8% target share over the last 4 games, but there's really potential for that to be more like a 12 or a 14. If you look at the running backs with at least 100 routes this season, he has a 2.79 yards per route run. That ranks only behind Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson. Guys, this is a very good receiver out of the backfield. His 20% targets per route run, that ranks 12th for the position. And then we have the schedule. Like they've kind of had a little bit of a rough schedule. Now you turn around, you get the Bengals this week. Okay, a 9.9 fantasy boost. That's the best in fantasy. You get a positive matchup against the Bears, the Bills, the Ravens, the Dolphins. Then you do get 2 tough matchups. You got to remember this: 2 tough matchups to close things out in the fantasy playoffs. Week 16 and 17, you get the Lions and the Browns, minus 3.6 and minus 5.6 fantasy boost teams, respectively. So I really like him over this next 4 to 5 weeks, Ian. I think he's probably going to, honestly, I think he's going to perform more like a high-end running back 2 or a low-end running back 1. over this next stretch of games. Probably cools off. I feel like a weather forecaster. Probably cools off a little bit more at the end of the season. Might have a few chance of showers. Could be a really bad game in week 17 against the Browns. But before that, he is a guy that could really help us make it to the fantasy playoffs. So, when you're digging through these things, and I really try to look at the schedule more this week because I know people care about the playoffs, it can be hard sometimes, and it's hard to find things where everything perfectly lines up. But it was pretty good here for Jaylen Warren.
I was going to say, man, let's worry about getting to week 16 and 17 first, okay? I know we want to have our cake and eat it too and just, have the perfect schedule going every single week the rest of the season. That doesn't exist out there. So again, these next 5 weeks, rank from the opponents in PPR points per game allowed to position 32nd, 20th, 27th, 25th, and 26th. That is smash spot after smash spot, ladies and mostly gentlemen. So Jaylen Warren feeling good. And yeah, it certainly seems like he's, got full control of his backfield. Kenneth Gainwell and Caleb Johnson still not getting much going behind him at all. One overperformer, though, Dwayne, someone who was crushing it during the first, 5 weeks or so of the season, took over the backfield ASAP Rocky. Quinshon Judkins, unfortunately, though, really has been a shell of himself in recent weeks. I don't think it's all his fault. I think we're seeing the Browns working with an offensive line, not up in their usual standards. And obviously, Dylan Gabriel not helping matters as well. So Quinshon Judkins, yes, had the massive 3-touchdown explosion against the Dolphins, but 3 of his other previous 4 games hasn't even cracked the top 24. So talk about Judkins and why he might be overperforming right now as a fantasy asset.
Yeah, so he is overperforming, but he does have a pretty good schedule coming up. And so he's a player that I still think could be very valuable down the stretch for fantasy. Here's the big thing. So with the utilization score for running backs, guys, the targets are a cheat code. And we know this for fantasy football, and the utilization score knows that. And that's the main thing that really hurts Quinshon Judkins. But I do want to say this. If we look at him and as far as his role goes, even though he doesn't get the receptions, Ian, he's averaged 18.6 attempts and 2 targets since he's taken over as the lead running back. And that's taking out the one game where he got knocked out early with the shoulder injury. So, and despite the offensive struggles with Dylan Gabriel at the helm, doesn't really matter. It probably doesn't matter who's going to be under center. It's going to be a problem for the Browns. But despite those struggles, man, he's only been held under 19 total opportunities in one of his 6 healthy games. So really, like, his role, the role he has, it's not perfect because we'd rather have more targets, but the role he has is kind of overcome the bad scripts. They've still managed to give him his touches, and now the schedule loosens up. So you get the Ravens, that's a 2.6 fantasy point boost. Then you get the Raiders, that's a below average matchup. But then you get 2 decent matchups, 49ers, Titans. You get a nice matchup against the Bears. Bills, it's a good matchup on paper. Like, you might be getting beat 40-0 though. So I don't know, like, you might get 10 carries in that game. Then you get a tougher matchup to end the season against the Steelers. But I do think that's a pretty good stretch, man. And so I think that Judkins, like, he could surprise and look more like what we saw him look early in the season because of this stretch of games that we're getting, and the fact that even though they've been bad, like, he's still been getting his carries in those games. He's really only had the one game besides the injury game where he dudded from a usage perspective.
Just, it's wild to me, man, that we haven't seen that same guy even just getting tough yards. I mean, he's literally 44th among 45 running backs in success rate these last 5 weeks. Only Chuba Hubbard has been worse. South of 30%, guys. That really has been tough sledding. So only 3.1 yards per carry, and that's with a free 46-yard touchdown against the Dolphins, doing a lot of that work. So again, not taking away his big plays. We've seen him rip off some of those big runs, just been a bit since we have gotten them. So usually, though, that volume wins out. Still going to be someone you're starting in far more fantasy lineups than not here moving forward. So good stuff on the over and underperformers, Dwayne. However, we do have some big time movers to get through as well. It's quarter 4 here on the Fantasy Life Show. One of my favorite parts of the utilization tool suite over at fantasylife.com is the team styles page. You can go ahead and look at their shift in motion, their play action, and one of my favorite perks, the drop back rate over expected. Dwayne, for the first 7 weeks of the season for the Detroit Lions, they were in the negatives each and every time, often by quite a bit, -8%, -12%, a very run-heavy team. Then they had their bye, picked out a +1% drop back rate over expected, but then in the first game with Dan Campbell calling plays, +8% for the Detroit Lions. Jameson Williams balled out. I don't think it was a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't know that that'll stick. Like when I look at Dan Campbell, I don't see a coach that screams pass the ball to me. Like I still feel like he's going to want to pound the rock, but I do think that he's doing some nice things for JMO. Jameson Williams really for the first half of the season, Ian, we talked about it multiple times. You and Chris Allen had talked about it on the Start Sit show. I'm just out there like getting the steps in, right? Just out there, getting some exercise, running some wind sprints down the field, not really getting the targets. But this last week, we saw him getting in motion a little bit more. We saw him working more the intermediate areas of the field, running the dig routes, things like that. So getting more integrated into the offense. And what's interesting, Ian, is it's not just this game. If we look at him, it was his best game of the season with 23.9 fantasy points with Dan Campbell calling plays, utilization score of 85, 23% target share. But like over the last 4 weeks, he's got 3 top 20 finishes. JMO. So he's been coming through for over the last month. Now his dud in there was a complete 0. So you still have the one bad game was really bad. But that's an average of 14.8 fantasy points over those 3 games with a 62 utilization score. So we had to move him down to boom bust wide receiver 4 territory. I still don't think we can remove the words boom bust from JMO, but I do think now he's boom bust wide receiver 3 territory. And man, if we keep seeing what we saw last week with Dan Campbell, maybe we get the second half breakout that we thought we might get from JMO, the way they talked him up all summer. And again, those specific comments about the change, they said the disconnect between the coaching staff and the OC and the players. So I have a feeling JMO might have been a little bit of a squeaky wheel here.
Hey, I got him ranked as my wide receiver 31 ahead of this week. Freeman, the wet blanket himself, is actually higher than me, wide receiver 26. I do think he's firmly in that, Tez Johnson, Jawan Jennings, Troy Franklin sort of tier. And just as I'm even looking at it, man, it's not an easy matchup. We're going outdoor and facing off against the Eagles. But hey, it is a situation where I certainly trust the Lions passing game more than some of those other squads. Might need to tweak that and even move him up a little bit in those ranks. Another wide receiver, Dwain, unfortunately not riding as high as Jameson Williams lately. That is Justin Jefferson with the Vikings. Obviously, the J.J. McCarthy experience has been quite bad if you want to look at things like EPA and completion percentage over expected. He actually profiles as one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, all the way down there with Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward. So, Dwain, I did take the liberty of watching every single target between McCarthy and Jefferson today, and just there's blood all over my keyboard from my eyes. Like, it's just a horrible, I'm just playing. So it wasn't great. All right. I think we can all agree on that. You guys have watched them play this year too. I will say, though, the first 3.5 games were really fine for the most part. You had a miss here and there, but Jefferson dropped some passes. It was that last half against the Ravens that really got rough. They only connected on 1 of 8 passes. We had some of the body language. We had a few bad throws from J.J. McCarthy, but overall, Dwain, I came away from it like still believing Justin Jefferson is incredible, and I have enough faith in McCarthy to hopefully still get low-end, borderline wide receiver 1 production out of Jefferson. So again, I'm not expecting fireworks and our usual Jay Jettas, just excellence out here, but I would just caution not have everyone completely freak out. I'm going to keep starting Jefferson. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, he's averaging 12.7 fantasy points in 4 games with J.J. McCarthy this year. So obviously, like that's a low-end wide receiver 2, not a low-end wide receiver 1. But I am with you because the intent is there. I mean, he still has a 31% target share. 31% of his comps, still ended up being top 12 wide receivers. The others have been right there as that high-end wide receiver 2 territory. But he's got a 36% target share, 8.5 targets per game, 111 air yards per game. Now, a lot of them were in the bloodbath you talked about. The second half of that last game is where a lot of those air yards came from. So I'm with you. Like, I think the intent is there, and Justin Jefferson is, a proven elite wide receiver. So I didn't move him down as far as what the utilization score recommended. It actually said that, he's probably more of a mid-range wide receiver 2, but I put him in as a low-end wide receiver 1 in the rest of season projections.
I know a lot of people bringing up the catchable target rate, which isn't great. It's at 64%, but it's not like every other receiver in the league is just lapping that, guys. That same 64% rate is either matched or we're seeing lower marks from guys like DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Rome Odunze, Luka, Nico Collins, and T. Higgins. So again, not ideal, but still think it could be good enough to produce hopefully top 12 results moving forward. Last one, Dwain, here on the Fantasy Live Show. Trey McBride, a perfect utilization score with Jacoby Brissett. How about them apples?
Yeah, a 4-game sample with a 100 utilization score. It has not been seen before, Ian. So Trey McBride setting history for the utilization score, averaging 23.7 fantasy points per game. All those things we talked about earlier with under center, play action, marrying the run and the pass game. What does that do? That puts linebackers like Ian Hartitz in a real bind. And then you got to try to cover a guy like Trey McBride. Man, I hope getting Trey Benson back like that, maybe we get him back in the next week or two. That would really be nice as well, Ian. But here's the big thing. More play action targets, but the targets have been there, but the air yards, Ian, 90.3 air yards per game for Trey McBride versus 50.8 with Kyler Murray. So 90.3 with Brissett. And that's been the big difference because, man, you just don't see those sort of air yards for tight ends. If you go look at it, it's littered with guys getting 40 to 50 per game. And so when you suddenly become one of these guys getting all these targets and getting air yards in that range, like the utilization score obviously sees it, and it's like the alarm bells are going off like, this is an outlier scenario. This is an outlier scenario. We've talked about it in the preseason. The guys that break fantasy at tight end, they're the guys that can earn a lot of targets and they can also work down the field because what does it do? It gives them a chance to also score the touchdowns. And with Trey McBride, guys, obviously he's really good after the catch as well, but the touchdowns have obviously been coming. So Jacoby Brissett not only lifting Marvin Harrison Jr., helping lift Trey McBride to new heights as well. Or maybe we should say Trey McBride is lifting Jacoby Brissett to new heights.
5 touchdowns in his last 4 games with Jacoby. He only had 6 touchdowns in 49 games during the 2022 to 2024 season. So balling out, and honestly, man, was just doing so well last week. It seemed like he was tired from literally just continuing to catch the ball and pick up yards after the catch. So great stuff from Trey McBride, looking like one of the better smash picks of all of fantasy this year. Guys, again, one last time, make sure you go check out the utilization report over on fantasylife.com. We'll also have all of our ranks from our alleged set of experts up there before too long to get you guys ready for week 11 and beyond. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. As always, if you like the show, then please like the show. And otherwise, again, just have a great rest of your day. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again. And until next time, take care, everybody.